Okay, everybody, we've kind of hit on the two earliest colonies, the New England colonies, as well as the start of the Chesapeake with Virginia. We're kind of finish up and look at the rest of the colonies in this online video. So we have four really distinct subcultures developed in the colonial Americas. You have the Chesapeake, we talked about part of that already. We'll hit the other part of it today. We have New England, which we talked about the Puritan areas already. We'll hit on that a little more later. We have our middle colonies, which we haven't talked about yet at all, and also the lower south, which we haven't hit on yet either. That'll develop in this colonial period. So let's talk about Maryland. We're going to talk about Virginia a lot. We'll hit a little more of that in class as well. But let's talk about Maryland for a moment. So the Maryland colony was a little bit different here. So Maryland starts up here, and where we see this area. So early on, we see 1650. This is settled, just the yellow is by 1700. That whole green area is also. So we see this huge population boom in that part. So Maryland was originally invented as a refuge for Catholics. You saw this big anti-Catholic movement in England. And it was started by this guy right here, Sir George Calvert, the Lord of Baltimore. Hence why you see Baltimore, Maryland today. He started the county as a refuge for English Catholics because Catholics were not really well seen in England. Catholics were not really well liked. So in 1632, Charles I, King of England, granted the charter to Maryland, named after Mary. Uh, and basically, one of the things that Baltimore did is that to bring people in, he required toleration in Maryland. So he actually was called the Declaration of Toleration, one of the first religious toleration documents printed in the New World. And so essentially a lot of very wealthy Catholics in England were like, hey, we don't really want to go. So you literally saw Maryland, which was originally started up as a Catholic colony, populated by a lot of poor Protestant farmers and indentured servants. Um, so really, it wasn't really a very rich colony to start off here because originally it's supposed to be this haven for Catholics, ended up just being a lot of poor Protestant farmers, a lot of indentured servants, a lot of big tobacco plantations, small farmers. That's really about all that was really there at that point. And so you really kind of see it's designed with this really big idea of religious tolerance, but you don't really see the whole religious tolerance idea present in Maryland. Let's talk about the New England colonies. Talk about Massachusetts Bay a lot and the Puritans a lot. We did have a great migration, so of where people came into. So I was talking about John Winthrop already and the Puritans, those kind of things. We have this great Puritan migration talk about in class where you see, about 20,000 go to New England here over that time. But you do see other areas pop up here besides New England. So we talked about Massachusetts already and Plymouth, that area. We see other areas. Rhode Island pop up, Connecticut. We call it now New Haven, which becomes part of Connecticut. All these other colonies that pop up over time as well. And so the thing we really see this is that you have these very dispersed, nucleated villages. So you kind of see areas that are dispersed out here. You see some bigger villages like Salem, later on Boston, those kind of places, Hampton, a few cities like that. You see a few different, you see like dispersed, kind of spread out villages, a few that are a little bit closer together. Kind of is an example of Westerfield, which is, trying to find it on the map here, okay? But I kind of see for example, kind of these villages that are really small along the rivers, along the areas. Usually a meeting house, kind of more kind of centered around that meeting house where those nucleated villages are all centered around. Kind of meeting house being that really important place for the village. So we start getting new ideas here. So New Hampshire, one of the first ones, and kind of see where New Hampshire is here. So New Hampshire being kind of up here in the northern part up here, was one of the first extra villages. So it was formed as a kind of an add-on to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and was very dependent upon them because New Hampshire was pretty much landlocked, couldn't get a lot of water down, couldn't get a lot of water. We have Connecticut formed in 1662. Basically, it was really fertile land, so it was very, very similar to Massachusetts Bay. A lot of Puritans. They have something called their fundamental orders as their model of civil government. Essentially, it was the first truly written constitution. I mean, people might say that it was actually a more formal set of government, a lot more formal than the Mayflower Compact, which kind of just hashed together. This is kind of a very formal, regimented kind of constitution made. So the government in Massachusetts at the time, or in Connecticut, was based on those religious values, and those fundamental orders were a big piece of that. So you have New Haven. It was kind of a way for Puritans to make essentially county closer to church and state. So, it's the whole pressure between, separating church and state, especially kind of see it in areas like Virginia. Here is just very tight like that. So they're even closer in church and state than Maryland, than Massachusetts Bay was. You also have Rhode Island, which we'll talk about later on, with basically practiced by religious toleration there. Essentially, there are Puritans who were kicked out of the order, went to Rhode Island. And so you kind of see how those kind of colonies go that way. So New England colonies were really important. You kind of see as they develop here. New Hampshire being part of Massachusetts, Maine technically part of Massachusetts, Massachusetts Bay here, Plymouth, Connecticut, etc. But these colonies are really important in terms of their location to the seas, location of forests. So a lot of forest up here for timber. Timber needed for all the to build the big British Navy ships. So those are very, very important. You have all the whaling happen over here for whale oil, fishing. Those kind of the main industries you see happening over here in New England, along with also the other thing you see happening here is also molasses or rum distilling from molasses. The Middle County is a little bit different here too. You have Middle County set up. Your counties of New York and New Jersey, with the Jerseys, Delaware, Pennsylvania, all set up here by 1685. So New York was originally New Netherlands, made by the Dutch West India Company. Very, very small. It was a lot of different groups of people kind of grouped together. Finns and Swedes and Germans, those kind of areas. And what's funny is that it's actually captured by an English fleet without a single shot being fired in 1664. The Duke of York, okay, goes over to the New Netherlands and basically parks his fleet and says, all right, you're ours now. And New Netherlands becomes New York, named after the Duke of York. So we have much settlement here. You have English settlements in this area right here. These are the Dutch settlements up the Hudson River and the Delaware River. So that's kind of where these are. What's now modern day, New York City, right down here, was pretty much settled already. We also have, which was called New Amsterdam at the time, now New York. You have Albany, which was called Fort Orange at the time. So kind of see what the Dutch were all settled up here. It became, basically it was actually a private colony for the Duke of York, James. Honestly, the inhabitants had no official say. They weren't technically English settled, English colonists, and that kind of stuff. It was essentially a proprietary colony by James just to make money off. He made very little profit off of it. Pennsylvania is a little bit different. Pennsylvania was founded by a very radical sect called the Quakers. The Quakers were very different than the Anglican Church. They rejected the whole idea of predestination, original sin, and they were kind of like this anti-group that said that, all persons are equal in the eyes of God, which was actually really not normal at this time in Europe. And they're in a pack where they actually had men and women worship together. It was crazy, okay? And that all people can be saved. And so they're a very, very different way they acted. They're also pacifists, didn't believe in fighting wars. A lot of kind of situation with that kind of put together for Pennsylvania. William Penn was kind of the man who did this. He was a Quaker. A lot of times Quakers were being persecuted for their beliefs in England. He went to the king and essentially said, hey, can we do this as a holy experiment? Can we be like, just give us some land, let us get out of England, let us not be in your hair, and we'll go do this. So Pennsylvania, literally named Penn's Woods. There would be a society run on Quaker ideals. Religious toleration was a big thing. Basically you be whatever religion you want to be, and that's what it came down to. So all the groups that were getting pressured and harassed in Europe would go to Pennsylvania. You really saw it was also a society run on Quaker principles. So it was a society that promoted religious toleration, a society that promoted protection of rights of the propertyless people. So you didn't have to have property to necessarily have rights. If you look at other colonies like Virginia, Massachusetts Bay, if you wanted voting rights, you had to own property. If you wanted to be part of the assembly, you had to own property. Here, you had a right, you had a say, even if you didn't have property, which made it a very, very different situation. And so we saw a very different group of people settle here: English, Welsh, Irish, German immigrants, especially we don't say as like the Amish or Mennonites. They settled there as well in the 1700s to escape persecution in Germany. So all the groups that were being harassed in Europe ended up settling over in Pennsylvania. I think about this quick question here, and kind of interesting to look at, kind of think about. I might ask this in class too. Think about the holy experiment in Winthrop City on a hill. Mary, kind of think about this idea of these two ideas here. Kind of think about this and kind of bring us in for class if you could. But Think about Penn's whole experiment, saying, "Hey, we're gonna have this perfect society. We're all gonna live together and be great." You have Winthrop City on a hill, uh, saying we're gonna be this great society. We all kind of live together. Think about how different the Quakers are. Quakers being really, really very tolerant, being very pacifist, not believing in of being everyone's equal as a god. The Puritans were very, very different, yet kind of with the same idea. Make this perfect kind of whole society where everyone's happy, gets along in the new world. So you really have this very starting on, this very kind of ethnically, nationally, religious, diverse population. Um, so because you have all this stuff here, it's extremely, uh, very, very a lot of quarrels happen, a lot of issues happening between in Pennsylvania. You think about it, in Virginia, everyone's pretty much the same kind of person looking for gold. In Massachusetts Bay, everyone's a Puritan or a separatist, kind of this religious freedom idea. Pennsylvania is very, very different. Um, but Pennsylvania really prospered because they had that diversity. By 1701, William Penn grants self-rule to Pennsylvania. So essentially, they said, "Hey, Pennsylvania, rule yourself." Um, and there were certain Delaware colonies that were kind of off of the coast that kind of ended up kind of branching off as well. And so Pennsylvania kind of gets their first or their own little bit of original kind of independence from England that way. Other big cities, some of the big cities of Boston and New York. As more people come over here, you start seeing a lot more urban growth, from little farmers to being more cities. And obviously, a city of 28,000 doesn't seem like a lot, but back then it really was. And so we start seeing a lot more people moving to the cities. The cities getting a lot bigger, and those industries really moving to the cities versus being on all the small farms and plantations. We get the lower South get settled as well. So this would be North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And so their little settlements a little bit different here. The Carolinas were basically colonies that were built on slave labor. And so you're funny when you think about this later on. Um, they look like it literally looks like the Chesapeake in the terms of plantations, making stuff, making food, big plantation, that kind of thing. But slave labor was already kind of a part of Virginia when the Carolinas were founded, and um, they were really built on slavery, which is really kind of funny when you think about the first states to secede from the Union in the Civil War. The Carolinas are one of those, and so they have a really diverse group of settlers. So you have your slaves as well as the settlers who are in in the Chesapeake, but it's very different from the Chesapeake in that the Carolinas are a lot more swampier, muddier, more humid. There really is no one solid quote unquote South yet. The Carolinas are extremely different from Virginia at this point. Carolina was this kind of political utopia. They experimented with lots of different kinds of democracy. Originally, it was essentially granted in 1663 to 8 proprietors, so 8 guys who were basically made the king really happy. And these proprietors were inspired by John Locke, who hopefully you know from earlier history, really inspired by the Enlightenment. And they really wanted a government that essentially was led by wealthy lawmakers, the best of the best, the smartest of the smartest, but give the settlers regular citizens some kind of power. So really, it's the first time you kind of see that power being in the hands of the regular people as well. But Carolina's really struggled. They had a lot of problem bringing people over. Really, it was English planters from the Caribbean who moved to the Carolinas that really made things work. They brought a really strict slave code with them, and really led to the North and South Carolinas, with South Carolina being a little more strict, North Carolina being a little less strict. So kind of here is Charlestown, the only real true southern port, now today called Charleston. So you kind of see where it is right here. It's that link, if you will, to the Caribbean. The two big crops you have here were indigo and rice. The Carolinas had the perfect climate for this. Indigo was really important for a purple dye, with rice being important and really important food stuff, especially with the popularity of the East and the Orient. And so you see, this production just go crazy, crazy big. Rice, especially indigo as well. They were extremely labor-intensive crops, so really ideal for slave labor. I see Georgia a little different here. Georgia was different. It was a lot of times social utopia, but instead it was made for two reasons. One, it was a buffer zone. So you see, here's Spanish Florida, here's the South Carolina. Georgia is a buffer zone right here to make sure in case Spanish invade, there's no problems. Also, it was a debtor's colony. If people were in debt in England, they couldn't get out of debt. It was actually made for prisoners, essentially, a prison colony to go and get out of England's hair. So we're just going to kind of tip this thing here. You kind of see where we're at this point. Here's a little introduction to the colonies. Use your textbook. We'll do some more activities with this on Thursday. Thanks a lot, guys.